And Ted.
Hello, mate. My whole screen just went blank there for a moment. I thought, oh, it's just we're in a blackout. Happy Friday, my friend.
Happy Friday to you, mate. I was just observing us on our video there. We look pretty young back in our day. Gee, that was only 2 years ago. Gee, how time has treated us harshly.
I was actually at my hairdresser's the other day, a while back actually now, and she's gone, geez, you've gone grey real quick. Thanks. I think she's gone, it suits you. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Just finish the job.
Mate, you've got a little bit of, what do they call it? The grey hairs give you a little bit of that wisdom. So, yep. Boom. All right. Well, we've got a few on online now. So, Alison, afternoon. Jeff's excited. He's got himself a deal. Hey, Jeff, I think that one's a cracker, mate. If you got that on your SMSF, then you'll be extremely happy. We launched a deal the other night, Andy. Folks, anyone listening in, really nice architecturally designed building up there in Brisbane. Jeff's pretty pumped, like a fair few of our other clients are, I'm quite sure. But, yeah, nice one, Jeff. Mate, what are you drinking today? I bought a little random selection of wines, and I've ended up with I don't know, Villa Maria, Merlot. I don't even know. It tastes nice. Organic too.
There you go. No hangover for you.
Well, we'll see.
Mate, I've actually pulled your trick out because I had a glass of wine the other night. So I've actually pulled this one out of the fridge, the old Point Leo, just for tonight. And so, mate, I hate to say it, but it's a day old, so it's not too bad. It's not a Witten special, which is 2.5
not a week old or 2 weeks old. But folks, listen, check it out. This is not a promotion of a product, but it is something that Andy bought me for my birthday, which is meant to preserve wine. So if I have one glass, I can do something special to the bottle, and then I can drink it a week, a month, a year later. It says on the thing. So I'll let you guys know how I travel with that. Thanks, mate. Appreciate the little gift.
Mate, you're welcome. So as it goes to one of the mottos, life is too short to drink bad wine. So now not only can you increase the quality of what you drink, because you now don't have to buy 4 bottles for 4 different wine and wisdoms. You can buy one bottle, which will last all 4.
Nice. Well, I was turning into a bit of an alcoholic because you were making me feel bad to wasting wine, Andy. So I'm glad that I can give my liver a rest. But Jeanette reckons the old Villa Maria is good, so I've got a supporter online for that one. So
there you go.
There you go.
Into it.
Well, great to have everyone jumping on. Fair few people online now, mate. So folks, as you guys should know or could know, that this is our weekly debrief. We get a chance to hang out, have a wine. Andy and I were talking offline, and I said to Andy, when do you want to start? He goes, mate, 5 o'clock's fine. I don't have a social life anyway. So this is my social life. I think that's why we get on so well, Andy.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, this is our social life. It's we're quite happy in our little Zoom dungeons here. And mate, I'm loving the Wealth Coffee chat in the background there. It's I'm going to have to step up my game, mate. Neon signs.
Mate, we'll have to get one. Well, I need to get the sign that transforms to Wealth, Wine and Wisdom and the Wealth Coffee chats. Coffee in the morning and wine in the evening. All right, there we go.
So I'm not sure if all of you out there have heard this story yet, but Wealth, Wine and Wisdom is actually starting to build up a bit of momentum out there. And who would have thunk it? Jason and I, a couple of years ago, getting together to try and help out business owners and investors from making potentially catastrophic mistakes. And just to blow our trumpet a little bit, those people who listened in the early days of COVID, especially to Jason around property, saved themselves an absolute fortune or made themselves some incredibly good money and smart money. And then business owners, from the way that we were dissecting, the legislation, stayed above board. So massive impacts that the show's had in a reasonably short period of time, but it's starting to get bigger. And there's that you're starting to enter the realms of infamy when somebody taps you on the shoulder when you're on a plane flight to Sydney and goes, "G'day, Jason. How you going, mate?" And you're sort of looking up going, fuck, who, look, you're from Wealth, Wine and Wisdom. And it's like, so ladies and gentlemen, Jason's famous. So he's going to have his own Twitter page soon, and book signings in the not too distant future. But I'd love to hear for the person, if you're actually listening tonight, who tapped Jason on the plane. I'd love to see if you got a snapshot. It would have been great if you grabbed a selfie with him at that point in time too. But
it was too much of a shock. But then I was like, "What's going on? Somebody's seen us online." And it's quite a funny one, isn't it? Like this stuff, we kind of live in this kind of little Zoomy bubble, but then when you get a shock when it transfers to real life, like the virtual crosses over into the real
actual
version of the world. Yeah.
and here's us just thinking most of the time we're talking to ourselves.
Well, once or twice we probably have been, Andy, but there's a fair few of you guys online now, so great to have a bunch of you on. As always, big shout out to you guys: Kylie, James, Jeff, Dean, Allison, Shay, I love, and a bunch of others. Jeanette's there as well. So fantastic to have you on. Give us a shout out in the chat if you got any questions. Maybe we just go through the loose format, Andy. Loose format of what we kind of do each time we get together on a Friday. We have a bit of a loose format, folks. We've got usually we might talk about something that might be in the news. What's going on. We've got to keep ourselves sharp when it comes to not being distracted by the media machine. Sometimes there's good tidbits of information that we've got to double down on, and sometimes there's information we've got to completely ignore. Actually, I think it's more often the latter than the former. But that's an important skill to learn. Certainly, we think if you've got any questions on your mind, we'd love to answer them. So start doing those in the chat. Andy and I have noticed over the last couple of Wealth, Wine and Wisdoms that we haven't gotten around to the questions. So it's our commitment to you guys tonight to answer questions. And I'm going to make Andy responsible for that.
Whack them in there now. So #Q, or if you want to ask a question, then we'll wait for you to get in there. But if there's any burning questions, fire them through, whatever they are, whichever world they are, whether they're economics, whether it's property, whether it's investing, and we'll do our best to answer them. But our promise is tonight we're going to get to as many of them as we possibly can.
Absolutely. And maybe if we feel a little bit motivated or we see an opportunity, maybe there's one or two things we think you should know to keep an eye on, and we might tune into that and see what we can do. So there you go. But big shout out to Harry, Chris joining us, fellas, gentlemen. Good to see you guys online. But that is the general gist of it, folks. But other than that, we probably should have a little look at what is going on in the chat. There's a couple of questions coming in, which is great. Maybe Andy, I'll get rid of that. Maybe we do a little bit of what's in the news and then dive straight into the questions. I think that would probably be worth doing. So I might kick it off, Andy. Warm up the crowd, see what we can do for this evening's action plan. But team, what's in the news over in my neck of the woods, Andy. Let's listen. Guess what, Andy? Guess what?
You're sizing me up already, are you? It's going to be one of those nights, ladies and gentlemen.
Guess what? We've got another record, Andy.
Another record.
Another record.
All right. Let me have a guess at it. Give me a bit of context and let me see.
Well, if you would have watched my Wealth Coffee chat this morning, you probably would have got it already. But there is another record. Australians have squirreled away in this mechanism of financial control. They've squirreled away record amounts in this account so far in the last few years. Go Aussies. Record amounts. Where do you reckon they've stored it, Andy? Where do you reckon they've squirreled it away?
Well, my number one would have been the mattress. Number two would have been squirreling it away into tech devices in our rooms. It would have been to pay down debt. Would be sitting in offset accounts and mortgages.
No flies on you, Andy Fenton. There we go. Residential property borrowers have squirreled away a record amount compared to something somewhere of 232.
You got to put that up there, Jace. That's hilarious. Harry, you're a funny man. Oh dear.
Where's Harry? Yeah, probably in crypto. Nobody knows Harry. There's no way to check. There's probably an absolute record of people putting money into crypto. But
I put $1 million in. What do you mean $500,000? I got 20,000 in there left.
But Jeff and Carolyn were all over it in the offset accounts, which is fantastic. That's one of the reasons you and I have sort of had this conversation about. We don't think, there is what we would call tough times ahead for the average mortgage holder in Australia, even though interest rates are going to go up a bit. We don't think that that's going to have a disastrous effect for a number of reasons. Unemployment is low, employment is high. You and I were chatting the other day, Andy. You were talking to someone who, has a look at the economic machinations of the Australian economy. And 4% is kind of like, you can't get much lower than 4% unemployment because the 4% don't want to be employed,
or are physically not capable. So basically of the workforce. Yeah. So 4%. I've forgotten there's a specific term for it. I'll remember it shortly. But it's ostensibly economists around the world. It's the general consensus that it doesn't go below 4 because there is 4% who will not work no matter what is available. And then there's also the minor fraction of displacement, right? It's people transitioning into different roles can't quite get there or not quite the right fit and are just finding their space. So, 4% is the zero barrier.
So this is where we are, folks. We've got, low unemployment. We've got record amounts squirreled away in offset accounts. Andy, we also have, by the look of it, let's call it a record, but record household savings are also not only in offset accounts, but in, regular accounts. Folks, you guys know this. If you run with me a little bit, a savings account is a losings account unless it's connected to a mortgage offset, because at the end of the day, inflation, Andy, eats it away. You got cash sitting in a bank account. Inflation is 3%. You're getting 0.5% on your cash. You're losing value. You're losing actual, real, tangible value at 2.5% a year or whatever the number is. So there you go. And one that I think maybe, Andy, you might be able to sort of, have a little comment on here is, the budget. People are voting. We've had something flow out into our attention, and looks like the thing on everyone's mind at the moment when it comes to Australia and our economy is interest rates going up. Let's call it the end of cheap money, and who is going to make that less painful for Australians? Labor, Liberal, National, Freedom Party, whoever, whatever. And it seems that the idea that we might be, convinced to vote one way or another.
That's dead right, Andrew. Come on, Jace, to be fair, banks are paying a full percent for balances over 150,000. It really is. It's quite an incredible state of affairs, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
The only reason that you would have money in cash now, other than to take advantage of investment opportunity, is ultimately if you think that we're going to be in a big deflationary spiral. And the governments of the world have not let that happen for quite some time. And it's an interesting article, isn't it? Because ultimately the politicians don't control interest rates. It's the Reserve Bank of Australia. They can exert influence via way of fiscal policy, but not monetary policy. And the difference between the two is fiscal policy is, think of it, higher level stuff like infrastructural spending, land releases, all of the things that the government should be.
Free money to first home buyers to build stuff.
Free money to home buyers. It's unbelievable. You see those cartoons where they're just throwing money out of the back of a plane. You think that will never happen. And it's happened twice in the last 3 years. I think that this is a bit of a fright piece, and because ultimately they can't control it. But I think it's a great political tool and a political weapon that they can start to use to beat each other over the head with. But right now, mate, it looks like it's a dirty election already. I'm not sure who's been keeping up with the news and what's been going on, but every time I turn the channel, I see some Muppet making allegations about another Muppet, and it really is. This is not, so far that I've seen in the election, this is not a campaign of economic policy. This is actually a campaign of just smackdowns. They're discrediting each other. And look, probably they all deserve to be discredited equally, to be fair. But I don't see a lot of economics on the agenda at the moment, which is really interesting. And I think neither party will really have policies that will be able to do any better than the other when it comes to interest rates. They'll claim a win or they'll claim a loss, depending on where it sits. But I think really the long-term bond position is based on the inflationary targets. The inflationary targets at the moment are a moving feast, and politically, what they could be doing in order to expedite the potentially short-term inflation is to do a little bit more fiscal stimulus in and around the importing and exporting of our raw materials, trying to inject efficiencies into those sectors, and they could actually have some real short-term wins in that space. They haven't chosen to do it, but that's really the only way that I can see them having a major impact. And let's face it, most fiscal budgetary things take 5, 10, 15 years to flow through and to have an effect.
Yep.
So we really don't see. And here's the thing: is that every 4 years, the new person in power actually repeals all of the old budgetary stimulus matters and turns it into a different direction, closes down the tunnel. We're not doing an east-west link; we're going to do a west-east link. So, mate, I think it's just another one of those opinions are like arseholes. Everyone's got one, and we seem to be getting more and more of them in the fin review at the moment.
Yeah, some of them stink, mate. That. But I did see which I thought was very interesting, and industries, and we do have a number of business owners tuning in as well to this. We serve business owners as well as property investors with our support. The government has, for the first time in 10 years, completed or at least put some pen to paper with a trade deal with India. And, they've been working on it for 10 years, which I think, folks, anyone in the marketplace where they could provide some services or some products or whatever it is to that market should be, eyes on the prize. It's a great one. One thing that's Andy, that is going to happen, which is going to accelerate certainly my neck of the woods when it comes to the real estate game. They're doing some deals with students and study and bringing those students to Australia from India, and that's going to be a win. But it is going to accelerate some of our issues when it comes to the real estate in the next 3 to 5 years, folks. But that's certainly going to be an excellent one. And as all of us need to do, we need to keep an eye on where some of those opportunities are arising. You mentioned one. I'm just going to skip quickly to this one, Andy, but you mentioned, some of our, our exports, and it comes to the world of basically Perth's the big, the world's quarry, to be honest, other than coal, which is kind of a bit on the nose long term. Short term, it's actually, who would have shorted coal, Andy, and oil before, before the war in, well, maybe Putin did. Who knows? We're not going to dive down any of those rabbit holes, but our mining is back on the agenda over in Perth, in Western Australia. Is certainly having a resurgence in its mining boom. It quote in quote marketplace. Certainly from a real estate point of view, team, Perth's really had a rough shot of it for over a decade. It had some fantastic benefits for, a time that, we started in 2000. Positive Real Estate, it started in 2000. And our first few deals were actually done out of Kalgoorlie and Perth, Andy. I don't know if anyone ever knows that. Right. But we literally rode the mining boom for, 10 years. And it started out of Perth. It had a little bit of a shakeout, and Perth's marketplace has gone sort of sideways for quite a while. But if anyone had that ride when Perth was on the map, and it really had some significant investment when it came to its mining infrastructure. One job on the mining camps equaled 5 jobs in the Perth CBD, or the Perth city. Some of those things I think could be back on the agenda for the West Australian market sometime soon. So, mate, I think that might be one to watch for us as well. A little bit of turning the tide in our exports.
Well, it's an interesting one, though, as far as the demand push inflation, as far as employment's concerned over in WA, because there's almost that perfect storm. I'm not sure what the subtext to this article was, but over there, WA has basically been its own people's republic now for the last 2 and a bit years.
Yeah.
And that obviously exacerbates the problem in that wages are going to go up, because the pool, not only nationally is quite small at the moment, but the pool then to WA is even more isolated, because and let's face it, a lot of people made some great money going up until this period of time. They've just gone on holiday throughout COVID and throughout these other periods of time, going, stuff it. I'm not working 10 times harder for the same coin. So they've taken a bit of a break. So there's been almost the perfect storm, and we've got a few clients and friends who are right in the thick of all of that over in WA at the moment. So
yeah,
there's quite a lot of edges to that sword. It's not just two-sided. There's probably about 7 or 8 different ways that or contributions to this wages growth.
Yeah. Well, I saw an interesting article the other day. The Western Australian government posted a significant surplus, Andy. I think, if I remember correctly, it was $8 billion or something, where the rest of the country was in negative, and they have crushed it. So it's an interesting one. What I do know very broadly, when wages rise, and pretty significantly rise, then property prices often rise afterwards, and or rents rise as well. And Bob sort of said, rents going up. Yes, absolutely, rents are going crazy. Now, I looked back, and I I said, folks, we're officially entering the rental boom 16 months ago, and there has been some significant increases in rents across the country in the short term, but also I think it's only just getting started. So we're going to see that. We're going to see that rent's going to go up. Supply is tight. Wages, I think, are going to continue to squeeze, Andy. And some interesting things afoot when it comes to the marketplace. This is an interesting one. Bob, you're going to like this one. Andy, this you might be happy about this. The good old Victorian marketplace is getting a little bit of premium attention when we're talking about our rental increase in values.
Yeah, right.
And it's an interesting conversation because the Melbourne or the Victorian rental compression, and lockdowns gave it the old 1-2, but really the underlying reality of if the market's allowed to be normal, people are allowed to sort of, leave their homes and behave normally and go to work and have jobs and, stuff's kind of normal. Well, that marketplace has bounced back pretty significantly quickly. And the medium to bottom end of the rental pool has done that very quickly. And that makes sense, Andy. That makes sense, folks, that, the rental bounce has happened at the bottom end of the market, not necessarily the top end of the market, because, that's where those people are back to work. That's where those people are kind of like, back to full-time jobs or whatever it might be. So that income security is pretty significant. And there's plenty of other examples across the country, folks, when we're talking, pretty big rental increases when it comes to our properties, different places and different spaces. So, there's some interesting things afoot. I think it's only getting started, team. You have a look at these types of yields. Now, this is quite significant high value property, Andy, but, if the mortgages against those rises from 2% to 4%, I believe you will see those yields not necessarily, translate for every single spot, but I think you'll see those yields, go up pretty significantly, double in percentages and dollars potentially, because the cost has to be passed on.
Yes.
The cost has to be passed on, folks. I think that's going to happen over the next couple of 2 to 3 years. That it gets delayed. Tim, it gets delayed because people have 12-month leases. So it's basically building up, and, like things that should be happening right now, if they're available to, then they're not going to happen for 12 months. It's not going to flow through into the marketplace for 12 months. That's why we keep telling our team, our investors, Andy, slash, our investors, Royal, your and my people we serve, right now it might be prudent to do 6-month leases, not 12-month leases, over the next little bit to take a look at, which is interesting. But there was a question. Let's do a question from Allison, maybe in and around this thing, talking about the idea of Airbnb short stays, banning short stay because there is a short supply of rental. And, well, it's, the question is, what do we reckon? Well, I reckon that's, I think that's personally socialist rubbish, Allison. But at the end of the day, hey, you guys stop using something that you own for your benefit, because the government's failing of managing the economy and managing things. So we're going to make you, the individual who's planned really well, have a negative effect. And I don't think that's on. I'd fight tooth and nail on that. I don't think they could push it through. The regulation of it has actually started to occur, Alison, in other ways. And I don't think it's regulation because of supply issues. In New South Wales, there was some law passed in 2021 that you had to register as the supplier of short-term rentals, and there's some legislation, Andy, folks, that you've got to supply something that's up to speed, up to code, short term. Hotels and student accommodation have some pretty significant legislation. They have to incur expenses and costs to to provide that type of accommodation. And I think that was fair. I think that was a fair way of making it, safe and applicable. But this type of legislation, regulating it, limiting it, I think people would be up in arms about it. I
Mate,
actually think it's going to get worse, Andy.
This is a classic example of, and we've actually been talking about it in the business over the last week, and especially after we caught up with the afterburners, the Royal Australian Air Force consultants. In that, this is a classic example where people look not to the root cause of the problem; they actually just try and solve a surface issue. And it's laughable. To me, this is just people banging on about, again, another opinion piece, probably smells a little bit. And because ultimately what the context of this is that they're trying to fight technological progress.
Yeah.
And I think by regulating out of it because it's deemed to be unfair due to whatever the root cause is. Now, without going too far into it, you only have to go, well, why is the issue here, and ask a couple of depths into the why. You'd go, well, why is the issue here? Well, there's not enough properties on the market. Why isn't there enough properties on the market? Because there haven't been enough developments come through. Maybe there's a little bit of a developers not producing as much more recently because of cost prices. But why is that? And then you go back to land banking and you go, well, why don't we fix the problem at the root cause rather than try and just treat some little band-aid solution, which creates more legislation, more red tape, more pain in the ass for everybody involved. It's just crazy. This is the kind of backwards thinking that just really is not productive.
Yeah, and saying it another way, you're trying to treat a symptom, not the cause, right?
Yes.
That's basically what we're saying. And in my space, in the world of real estate, it's been declining. This supply issue has been declining well before COVID. You guys have heard me rabbit on about this endlessly. And it started, unfortunately, with APRA and the availability of credit. And so, that's the one, folks, that we all got to watch. The availability of credit affects real estate prices more than anything else, we got to keep an eye on that one as we go. But there's certain places. So Bob's sort of saying they did it in Sydney. You can only Airbnb for 6 months. There's certain legislation or limitations, depending on the state, depending on the building, depending on the council. So there are some things that are sort of in play, every sort of new idea finds this kind of like equilibrium inside some system of some description. But really, at the end of the day, team, the short-term letting world is certainly, I think, going to make things worse, because what I do know in the 2020s, in 2020, a lot of people took their short-term letting properties out of the short-term letting market and put them back in the long-term market. So you're going to see this get worse over the next little bit as well, because people are going to put them back into the short-term letting pool. I'm about to put 2 of my properties, when they finish their leases, which is in June and August. I'm about to put 2 of my properties into the short-term letting pool, folks. Okay, so I'm taking it out of the long, because now that short-term letting demand is high. It's well worth doing. I've got one in Canberra, literally 1 kilometer, from the CBD of Canberra, absolute crushes for short-term letting. And I got one actually here on the Gold Coast, right on the water. So those 2 are going to go back in the short-term pool. And there are a lot of people doing that, Andy. There's a lot of people doing that, folks. You're going to, like, my yield is going to bump from 4.5% to over 8% when I do that. Why wouldn't I? Why should I be restricted in doing that? It doesn't make any sense to me. So, there you go. And, it will, I think that plus supply issues and also population, it was in the budget, Andy. It was in the budget. 600,000 people in the next 3 years, in Australia, accelerating the students, let's say, from India, the country, the government's done a deal, to get more trade going with India. There's some great upside if you own real estate, or the right real estate in the right spots, and certainly I think as business owners and, those who might be participating in other types of investments, that, if you're in the right position, you're going to benefit from that. That's for sure.
Yeah, 100%.
Here's an interesting one. A little bit real estate focused today, folks, but the gap between another record, Andy.
Another record. Another record. We should write newspapers, Jace.
We should. Oh, Alexis, I hope you're okay, mate. Hope you don't have the Rona or anything. Late and sick. Whiskey, wine, and wisdom. All right, yeah, whiskey can get rid of that. It could be. I don't think we need two types of alcohol on this show, Alexis, but it does sound good. First we have a whiskey, then we have a wine. There you go. Got it around the wrong way. I hope you're all right, mate. So, mate, listen, it's an interesting one. The gap between house prices and apartment prices in these cities is pretty significant these days. Look at those numbers. And it's an interesting one. I think over the next little bit, the apartment world will get a little bit more attention than the house world, just because the house prices have gone up faster than the apartment prices.
Well, do you remember, Jace, when we were talking about this 2 years ago when the pandemic first started? And do you remember? Who remembers what everybody, all of the media, everyone was saying? It's the new what? It's the new normal. And what were they saying? Is that we were all going to be living in bloody shanty towns here, there, and everywhere, and never leaving the house ever again. And we actually got onto I always forget his name. Jace, Jonathan is actually one of the largest property investors in the world. It controls one of the largest property fund in the world. And loved what he had to say. He said that there's been the Black Plague, the bubonic plague. There's been plagues and various different pandemics many, many times in history. And after none of them have we all just gone and resided in the country. Every single time we've gone back to the cities. We've gone back in force, and life gets back to normal because we're a herd mammal. And instinctively, we want to be in proximity with each other. And so this is a really interesting one from a behavioral economics perspective in my neck of the woods, because I kind of see the logic behind it. Everyone went to the tree change and got out. Then they realized that in Australia, the internet sucks when you're in the city, let alone out in the middle of nowhere where the view's beautiful, but the internet sucks, even with Elon Musk's internet system. And I reckon this could be a really interesting one to watch. And I actually wanted to get your thoughts on it a little while back, because I thought as people go back into that market, then, it could really put, the pricing pressure back into it, because people go back to lifestyle, office, city, in my neck of the woods, St Kilda, Albert Park, maybe even, the Docklands, because that's a beautiful spot, the Docklands. You got the beach on the door. So, mate, what are your thoughts on how this is going to transpire in the medium term?
Well, if we take a little bit of I always butchered this bloody saying, the one you do. History doesn't repeat itself, but it's a great mimic. Is it a great mimic? Hey!
You nailed it.
But if you have a look at what happened with the investment activity around the mining boom, people chased returns away from the city and into the larger rural towns, and even some of the smaller rural towns, and people moved from the city to the country for jobs, and they paid, exorbitant prices and all sorts of stuff. Same version of the world, same dollars and cents maneuvering around, just different reasons this time, where, hey, I don't want to be locked up in Melbourne. I'll pay any price to take me and my family out and go live in the country while everyone else is locked in the city. Now that might be over and it's pretty well, done and dusted, or well, everyone's kind of getting back to almost pretty normal. They're like, well, like, what am I doing here? There's no actual benefit right now. When that money leaves the country and goes back to the city, the local buyer, the local renter, could not and will not pay the premium that, the person came from somewhere else. The arbitrage of the city buying to country buying, is good on the way in, but not great on the way out. The person local can't afford it. So, like, I think that there will be some issues in that space. What may make it not so prominent this time is the government actually prior to COVID had done some pretty interesting things when it came to immigration. So you could get a Guernsey, you could come to Australia, but if you move to these zones, right? Move to these kind of regional, they called them regional zones. So if you wanted to move to a city zone, well, there's the hurdle rate. But if you want to reach a regional zone, then away you go. So I think that might. I haven't looked into it of recent times, but I thought they changed Newcastle, they changed Gold Coast, they changed places like Wollongong, they changed these areas that were right on the fringes of cities to these regional zones. And I think that might sort of save a little bit of that. But that's where it was a disaster last time. Let's just cut to the chase in one sentence. It was a disaster last time it occurred with the mining boom. It certainly could have that effect this time, depending on what would replace it.
Yeah, right.
Yes. Allison's got a little bit of something. I mean, the Docklands, I think now, it's an interesting one. Docklands, you get places like Zetland in Sydney, Brisbane doesn't necessarily have too many of those places, but Melbourne and Sydney end up with some of that international flavor a while ago, Allison. Most of those properties now have really sort of seen turnover, and I think that the government legislated, unfortunately, against that. I thought that was a bad move. That we needed money, we needed development in Australia, and international money was providing that activity. And since that's gone, and since they've tightened the Australian, Aussies' access to liquid capital or borrowing, that's been a real disaster for our supply chain, unfortunately. So, yeah, that's an interesting one.
We've got one here from Yasmin, and I think I picked this one earlier in the week, and I said I promised that if she put it up here that we'd address it. So let's have a look at this one. Trying to set up a share portfolio for my kids. Have information paralysis. I've been able to set up share accounts through my bank, but I don't know what to invest in. Was wanting to put 2,000 aside for the 3 kids. There's a bit more in there. Can you suggest the best educator or best way to educate myself? Don't want to be a trader, just happy to make regular small payments. I was thinking of bonds, EFTs for diversification. I want something low cost that I can buy and just hold, no trading from my end. Yasmin, it's a really good question. And when we start with smaller amounts of investing, there's really a couple of ways that you can go about it. And this is just my perspective, right? There are many, many ways you can go about it. So there's applications like Raise, and I'm not endorsing any of these, but I've used all of them at different points in time. Raise, which is a roundup app, whereby you spend $5.50 and it will micro invest the additional 50 cents. So it rounds up every transaction. And if you spend $10 or an even amount, it'll just put $1 in. And they have a selection of different types of index funds and things that you can invest in. You can choose your growth profile. There's also one spaceship that I was interested in for a little while, which was tracking a lot of the big giant companies around the world. Did really, really well. Didn't move very quickly when the market pivoted and kind of shit the bed a little bit as far as its returns were concerned. But it was a great app, great education in there. So you can look to technology solutions, and there's a lot of them out there. And I'd suggest have a little bit of a tinker and have a look at them. But the two old boring approaches to things are one, which I've seen has created a significant wealth for a number of clients that I've had over the years, where parents just bought the staples of the market. Right, the amount of times I've had people with $500,000 share portfolios, which have been BHP or Commonwealth Bank, where Dad every birthday threw $50 in, and they just went in dividend reinvestment. And dividend reinvestment is basically, instead of paying you out the dividend each year, so if you own $1,000 worth of BHP, it might pay a 6% dividend, which means that you get $600. All right. $60. Right. So instead of that going in or being paid out, what it does, it buys another share. And so these things over a lifetime, it's the compounding effect. And Einstein said the eighth wonder of the world was compound interest. And it's really quite incredible if you were just to put the birthday dollars into some of the staple stocks into Australia and ride that dividend reinvestment over time, and just check it every now and again. But you're talking about stocks that are the backbone of the Australian system. And so that is things like BHP, that is things like the banks in Australia. So dividend reinvestment. So you might pick something that you have an interest in. You might choose to go down that path of a dividend reinvestment. There's also stocks that are investment stocks, which you can have a look at. And the Barefoot Investor talks about them as well. I don't want to list too many of them because I don't want to be giving advice in this forum. But you can read a little bit of his book and have and there's some sort of stock suggestions in there as to what you could look at. A far more simple approach, but possibly not as interesting, is just indexes. And what an index is, if you've got, say, the Australian, people hear it all the time on the news. They go, the S&P 500 over in America is up by X. And most people go, that's great, American market's up. And what a lot of people don't understand is what the hell that actually means.
Yeah.
Or the All Ords in Australia, the amount of people who've gone, what's the All Ords? And it's kind of, you hear it every single day, but people just have no idea what that means. So these are indexes. And you can buy indexes super, super cheap through companies like Vanguard. You can just Google indexes or EFTs, exchange traded funds. And these are a really cheap way that you can get in. And it's almost like no-brainer investing. As long as you're ABI, which is always be investing, as long as you take that approach and you just keep putting money in, keep putting money in over a lifetime and keep doing that, which is what I suggest everybody should be doing. As long as you do that over a lifetime, this will be a very, very good approach for you. And so what an index is so the the ASX 200 is the top 200 stocks in Australia by market capitalization. So basically what that means is it's the biggest 200 companies in Australia. Now you can get the ASX top 50, which is the 50 biggest stocks in Australia. And what happens is it's got a survivorship bias, which means that if you're sitting in place number 50 and then all of a sudden 49 is bigger than you, the index automatically takes the company that is growing and kisses goodbye to the one that's not growing as much. And when you think about it, it's actually a very simple but very, very effective tool for indexes, because you're constantly getting the top sample of companies that are growing, the best or the largest. So you can be very, very stable, and you can get these in Australia. You can get them in America. So the S&P 500, which is the top 500 stocks in America, market capitalization. So you can get into these types of things. Again, I think you should do your research. And but when you're talking about smaller amounts of money and you just want to be investing over a long time and building these up, caveat, I don't know what your tax situation is and what the kids' tax situation is. You just want to make sure that they don't earn more than, I think it's $546 or $48 for a minor, because non-end income above, I think it's some obtuse figure. Harry might know, and he might chuck it in the chat in a moment, what that number is, because above that amount of income for your children, they will then get charged 66.6%. Who chose the number 548 or 46? I've got no idea. I've got no understanding as to what that reference point is. But the moment that they start to earn more than that, as far as income is concerned, then they would get taxed at a really high tax rate. So that's where indexes can be really good, because you're looking at a growth story, not an income story. And this is a way that you can $416. There we go. $416. Where did that number come from?
It's ludicrous, isn't it?
I know what it is. 416. There we go. Not linked to inflation or any of that stuff. So look, those would be the areas that I'd look at. And indexes can be great from a growth perspective, because you also get the capital gains tax discount if you hold it for more than 12 months. And it's a way that you don't have to be a specialist investor. You're literally just investing, if it was in the ASX 200, in basically the growth of Australia. That's effectively what you're investing in. Super simple, really easy way to get in, and a great way of getting your kids interested in the investment journey as well, because they start to look at their money going up and down. And, one day it's up, 20% more, and then, the COVID hits and all of a sudden it loses 30% in value. And that's really great training for kids to be able to see a portfolio do that, so that then later on in life, they become less inclined to jump out when markets do what they do, which is can be very, very volatile at times. Teaches them good pragmatic investment behaviors.
Yeah, mate. No, that's great, mate. Good conversation. And mate, I'm a big fan. I absolutely love the too big to fail Andy Fenton theory. So I think that's golden. So good stuff, mate. Another question here from Harry. We got a few minutes before we might wind up. But Harry said, "Is there an end in sight to the shortage in construction materials?" Short answer, Harry: no, there's not. And here's something I prepared earlier. Let's have a quick look at this actually, because it's a conversation in and around what's going on out there in the marketplace, Harry. Home renovations. What happened, team? Australians putting record amounts of money into their offset accounts. Australians having record savings in their bank accounts. And they can't go on holiday. What's the first thing that they've done? Andy, everybody, tell me, what is the first thing that people have done with their record money? What is the first thing they upgraded? And it wasn't their house, by the way, but I'll just tell you that. That was the second. But what was the first thing that they've spent money on? Team, tell me what it is. Chuck it in the chat. What do you reckon, Andy?
Their computers? Or is that just me? Is that's just me?
I think that's just you and me, mate. We're upgrading our computers and our cameras and stuff like that. But Bob reckons stock portfolio. No, Bob. No, not the stock portfolio. What for the first time, like that I could ever remember, Andy, did people pay more? Did you buy it outrageous. And then 3 years later you actually made money out of it? What was it?
Well, mate, the one thing that probably the only time in history I've ever seen that you made more money out of selling something secondhand, was the car market.
Car market, dead right, folks. So the first things first, Uber Eats. Alison, you're dead bloody right. I'm almost embarrassed. I won't tell anyone what my Uber Eats bill is a month. I can tell you that it's ludicrous. I need to buy shares in Uber Eats just to offset my the cost of Uber Eats. Listen, takeaway cars and secondhand cars. Team, Aussies just float out there. Secondhand cars, camping trailers, caravans, like it was a mode of transport or escape. Just got the attention. now everyone's kind of done that. What's happening, Harry, everybody, is then people are going, well, I've still got money left. What should I do? We've always wanted to renovate the house, and that's happening too. At the same time, we have like a shortage, an insane shortage of people who can do that for you. And also, it's much more profitable for tradies and contractors to actually go and work in the brand new, the new market rather than the existing market. So, team Harry, to answer your question, no, there's not going to be a shortage. Let's say I don't think for the next 12 to 18 months, I don't think that's going to stop. Medium term, it should get back to, I don't know what would call normal. I don't think that's even the right conversation, Andy. It'll get back to its new trajectory.
And that's that. There's and again, my brain's a bit short today, but there's an economic theory, and I've just forgotten what it's called. But when you have periods of time like this in such large but unusual inflationary spikes due to short-term issues like this, what tends to happen is the prices don't come back down. Is what ends up happening is standardized inflation catches up. And what I mean by that is we've got inflation on materials off the charts, right? But what we also have is stuff like this, right? So we've got food inflation, right? So we've literally got food inflation pushing up the overall inflation of the country and also the US. So what we tend to see is that if we drew sort of housing on here, as the cost of materials up here, well, what tends to happen is it sort of standardizes, still goes up a little bit by inflation, but what ends up happening is the rest of the inflationary figures slowly but surely start to catch up and bridge the gap.
You have to change your spot on your camera, Andy. Go to the bottom left. Boom. There you go.
So what happens is that if we say that this is the rest of the inflation, so this is milk going up, this is, well, petrol's gone up, but we've had a lot of things go up pretty rapidly. So it's reasonable to think that other things will actually catch up, right? And they will leave those prices there. And also you think about business, they're going to want to maximize their profitability when the cost of the production comes down or the cost of the last mile of the production comes down. These companies will naturally get greater levels of profit, and they're not going to want to pass that straight on. Unless they're forced to, and that'll be by big players like Bunnings and these, companies trying to, outsell Joe next door. But if Bunnings don't need to outsell Joe next door, then they're not going to try to. And they won't need to for quite some time into the future. So what we're probably more likely to see, and this is what I was about to say a lot of the economists that I've been chatting to have to say, which means it's probably fucking wrong. Probably going the opposite direction. But the cost of it coming down, probably less likely than the rest of inflation actually catching up. Makes sense.
Yep. And I think really at the end of the day, I think that will, for, the average Aussie, I think, wages and those things are sort of growing, people's ability to sort of negotiate. There we go. I think Andrew, is it the Pareto principle, Andy?
Well, we found my replacement. There we go.
It sounds very, very, very clever. But really, at the end of the day, we have, something almost similar in the world of real estate. It's like this. It's like mean reversion, where right now, the trajectory of, let's say, rental growth or whatever, should have been, you would like it to be every year compounding, but it's not linear. Right? Things aren't linear. And, it kind of saves up and boils and builds pressure and then pop. And then everyone's like, oh, I'm surprised. But if you aggregate it out over a whatever period you aggregate it out, it's not a surprise. It's kind of the mean, right? It's kind of like it's the 3%, folks, it's the catch up on the 5 years that didn't do anything. And it's, it's forward booking a a few years that won't do anything, right?
It's the age principle, isn't it? Like, what?
Yeah.
And I'm going to get somewhere with this, which is relevant. It's not going to sound like it initially, but what is the long term property return? Like if you extrapolate last 30 years, or 40 years, 50 years, what's the long term like average growth and income when you put it together on an annualized basis?
Like, I don't know about the income, but growth is around that sort of 9%, like 9-ish%, compounding. Chatira says saying like 6%. So, call it, let's cut it in the middle, call it sort of, 8.5%, 9%, 8%, 7%, something like that, Andy.
And so this is what why I laugh at so much, because there's the get rich quick schemes and there's all of that sort of jazz. But guess what? The average, the kind of average return that we look for out of a full growth equities portfolio over 30 to 40 years.
I don't know, 6%, 5%, 8%.
We're sort of in the 8 to 10%.
Yeah.
In and around that. And you're going to have the peaks and troughs over time, but that's why it's ABI, always be investing.
Yeah.
And the property, like when you have a look at the property trajectory, you're literally talking about the same thing that happens.
They're kind of neck and neck, really.
But they're going. I mean, the beauty, what you can't do, or you can do it with shares, but you've got to have a lot of guts to do it, is to highly leverage yourself into them. But property gives you that capacity to take a considerable amount of the bank's money and go into it. You can do margin loans and things like that in shares. It's just a lot higher risk because of the volatility. But ultimately, the long term, which is what you were talking about before, it's almost the same. And you've just got to go through the various different peaks and troughs in order to be able to realize that. And then it's just not sexy at the end. And and investing to a degree, it's kind of not.
Yeah,
the more sexy it is, probably the more chance you've got to get an STD.
And I was talking about that today, Andy. And the idea, like, how do you make an NFT tangible right now? Like, it's interesting, it's sexy, it's easy, whatever. But how do you buy milk with that? How do you pay your fucking mortgage with that? You can't, right? So, what happens is the world might recognize something that's interesting, sexy, exciting, whatever. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of kind of, intangible value floating around that can't really be converted into anything that we could actually use. And then it finds its equilibrium. It finds its thing. It finds how it kind of translates and converts and fits in, and then it settles down to business, and for you and me, like me, I was talking about this a couple of days ago. Every property that I've ever bought, even a piece of shit that I bought ages ago, right, has doubled in value between 10 and 15 years. Every single one. Like, so, but you know what? Some of them, Andy, like, didn't even fucking do anything. Matter of fact, they went kind of backwards for 8 years, and I'm thinking, oh, geez, this thing's a piece of rubbish. And then in 3 years, it just like went crazy, right? So, the outcome, the income, all sorts of stuff, and over the years, I've owned over 100 properties, and it's like, the longer you own an investment that has the ability to have longevity, and sometimes I think the share market has less ability to have longevity. Like a business in the share market has less ability to have longevity than a piece of real estate. So if you and I were to say, how certain would you be if we were to choose 100 pieces of real estate and 100 stocks right now that they would exist in 50 years' time? I'd be pretty certain that 90% of my real estate would exist in 50 years' time, but I'm not quite sure you'd be that certain that your stocks would exist in 50 years' time. You know what I mean? So there's some tweaks, but all of that said, medium term, 15, 20 years return, they level out. They level
Yeah.
out. It's 10-ish%. You know, folks, buy some good stuff, either some good shares and some good real estate, and leave it the fuck alone. Excuse the French. You know?
Exactly. Blah.
Exactly. Blah. Yeah. Well, and you know, Andrew sort of said it here. It was a good one. You know, in a word, you know, everyone wants it now, but the long-term game doesn't. It's not that sexy or attractive. You know. Yeah. You need to leave things alone to do what they do. You know, and for you know, anyone who's got wealthy, you know, I was reading an article. You know, there's two worlds. There's Warren Buffett, you know, one of the world's most famous investors when it comes to the share market, and one of Australia's. I don't know. Like, tell me, folks, in the chat, who's Australia's #1 property investor? Not developer, but property investor. Andy, do you know who it is?
Property investor, #1.
Investor owns the most real estate as investments. Personally, well, with his structures and personally, it's not in a unit trust. You can't buy his shares or anything.
God,
Me. It would be great if it was me, Bob. I'd love that.
Could be one of about 5 people, I reckon.
Well, as an individual, Bradley, I mean, McDonald's as a entity is one of the biggest in the world.
So I think,
however,
short of the guy I was talking about earlier, they, as a business, they are the largest real estate. As a business, they're the largest real estate owner in the world. Yeah.
Yep, real estate owner in the world, and that's an interesting one, Andy. You know, these businesses, and I think, Andy, here's my pick. I've got a. I think Amazon distribution businesses are going to overtake McDonald's into the future.
I'm not sure that they are. I reckon there'll be a McDonald's next to the Amazon distribution centers.
Amazon's like, we've got too much ahead. All right, Catholic Church, you're dead right. You're dead right. Mate, Allison, you got close on the name, but it was Harry Triguboff. Harry Triguboff, he is a developer, but if he develops to rent those properties as well, he owns over 10,000 individual pieces of real estate as the private owner, Andy. It's him. It's his thing. You can't buy the shares of his 10,000 properties on the stock market. He's obviously he's got companies to trust, how he's structured, whatever. But you can't buy into his company. Like, he's not listed, you know. And you know, this thing, you know, these guys, these people, you know, your world in the sort of the stock market and the share market, you know, famous person, the owners of, like, you know, Magellan Fund or like whatever, like these people, it's like, but you know, whoever they are, probably not a great
one in the press at the moment.
Probably not a great example, but you're talking Buffett and the Magellan Fund or whatever. Like, they all say it, mate. They all say it's long term. Like, they all say, you know, own it, keep it. You know, 20 years, 30 years, then you'll be wealthy. You know, nobody says, oh, mate, you know what you should do? You should take everything and trade it short term and take high risk because that's the way to wealth. No one says that. You know.
No, look, once you've got reserves, you can take punts, and punts will pay off.
Yeah.
But if you want to take the punt with the bare minimum, then it's a statistic game, and the statistics don't work in your favor.
No, the house always wins, Andy.
Yep.
When it comes, yep. The game always wins. As we go. Well, maybe that came to a, you know, not necessarily a great ending, but an ending of some sort.
Here's a way of just throwing it in so we can answer all of the questions and wrap it up in 30 seconds. Is that because Harry asked a question earlier on? Is what's our take on governments going into coins? Well, what we think about sexy investing. You know what Jason and I think about politicians and the government's capacity to deliver on projects.
Well, they'll fuck that up.
So number one, if so, my opinion is that I reckon we will be crypto based in some way, shape, or form, or that blockchain technology will be the foundation for the global currencies. I almost think that that's a fait accompli. It's just going to happen. Not exactly what you call a great green debate, though, Harry, because apparently it's not a very green way of doing it. So
No.
I think that it's going to be very unpopular based on our green policy, but nobody really talks about that. But ultimately, the sexiness that Jace was talking about before with the NFTs, that was the crypto market. And we've been saying it for a long time that until this thing has practical, tangible use in the world, then it's not going to stabilize. Right. And the practical, tangible use in the world is when we can go down and we can buy some milk with it, or we can buy property with it. And yes, there's been the ability to buy things here and there, but ultimately the fiat currency will become a digital currency. It's almost there right now, right? But there's a multiple different avenues that this could go. The government introduced their own stable coin, and they will fuck it up 6 ways from Sunday for the next decade. All right, mark my words. It's going to be an absolute. I mean, look at what they do in East-West Link, and look at the tunnel in Melbourne. Look at any major infrastructure project that the government have rolled out in the last 20 years, and tell me one that ran to budget and on time.
Yeah.
And here's the let's work with miracles before we ask for the impossible. Work with the impossible before we ask for miracles. Let's tell me a budget, one that's actually been under budget and under time. If you find that little needle in the haystack, that's the diamond in the rough. And I'm pretty sure there's maybe one of them around, but of a sizable nature. So what I think is probably the more likely run is that the government try to do it and fail and realize that they're in over their head, can't control it. And this is a big thing, right? Or they then tag team with a major coin provider out in the market, and it'll probably be linked to other countries in the world, maybe the US, maybe European partners, maybe a Commonwealth coin, because the overall knowledge in order to be able to run this properly, I think we're just falling short in the government's hands, and unlikely for them to be able to roll it out effectively. So I reckon it's going to be a really interesting one to watch. But you watch how slowly progress happens once it gets into the hands of the government.
Yeah.
You will have seen crypto go from zero to hero in a very, very short period of time, and the types of building blocks and the technology, that Moore's law has just taken off. It's like a hockey stick yield curve. But you watch that come to a crashing halt when the government starts to deploy it. And so that's sort of my 2 cents on it, Harry. And how that will manipulate the market, who the hell knows? But I can tell you the people who are making real money in crypto right now are the people who are manipulating it, which are the Musks of the world, and maybe allegedly the Musks of the world, maybe. Please don't kill me, Mr. Musk. But the people who have the ability to put significantly large amounts of money in and rip it out really quickly because they control the market, right? And then the hedge fund managers of the world, they're the ones who are making real money out of crypto. And then the rest of the people now, it's this tail of the fish.
It's a tail of the fish. And I like you brought it to exactly where I was going to say, Andy. Like, and a lot of people don't like to hear this, folks, but you actually need, now, whether the governments do a great job of it or not is not what I'm talking about. But you actually have, when there's a great white, fucking shark in the pool with you, and you're not a great white shark, right? The hedge funds, the smartest people in the room, they are going to rip you to shreds. And the world of that stuff, there are, I mean, they're bigger than great white sharks. They're capitalist black holes out there, just hoovering up like value and wealth. And what's happened, there's been this sex appeal, Andy, to get away from the control systems that governments and capitalism have kind of like put in boxes for quite a while, which I don't argue against. I think it's actually, we need a shake-up of that system because it's toxic and it's not so great. But what happens now, that's happened outside of frameworks and controls and whatever. And there are literally, oh man, it's insane. It'd curl your toes, folks. What happens outside of those, outside of the coloring in book, outside of the lines, and whether we like it or not, the governance of countries and economies are meant to provide some rules of engagement so we can all kind of benefit from value, from wealth, from our toils. And capitalism organizes itself not in that way if it doesn't have framework. The biggest, hungriest, great white black hole Hoover, wins. That's its organizing principle. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's just how the game plays. It's just how the game works, folks. So, anyway, we could end up down this rabbit hole for about 10 hours, I think, Andy.
It's the financial version of what the bleep is this?
What the bleep is? It's bloody completely true. It's so true. It's so true. Follow it down that rabbit hole, and there's a lot of conversations to have. But we're not going to have them tonight, folks. We're going to call
the unicorn.
Anyway, we probably should call it quits, Andy.
Well, mate, I think it's a good way to finish it up, is that that's the way the game's played.
That is the way the game's played. Do not blame the players, because the players are just playing the game. At the end of the day, the rules, the ones we play in, are the ones you need to understand. Yeah, I think you're right, Andrew. I think you're right. Governments are great for governance, and there should be frameworks for societies. I'm a big believer, and that's why I think it's never been more important to vote for great people. When it comes around to the world of our politicians, they've been pretty average for too long, to be honest. But anyway, there we go. Alison reckons we need more time.
That's where we put up Jason's nominee application form. Scan the QR code here. Witten for Nerang or the Gold Coast,
wherever we need to be, mate. Now, we promised that we might get together in person with a few crew. That's still on the radar, folks. And also, I think, mate, I reckon it'd be great to do some type of live get together and maybe stream one of these live out to people, have a live crowd, a combo of it. So, folks, stand by for that one. We'll give you some notice. It'll be after April. I think Easter's a big write-off in the middle of April. Live in Melbourne, Chris is voting for. Maybe live either Melbourne or Brisbane. We'll take some votes.
I'm in.
I'm in. All right, mate. Well, that's it. I think we should call it quits.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Appreciate it. We got to all of the questions, so we didn't skip out this time, which is great, and we appreciate them coming in. So keep them coming, and anything you think of during the week. But I think that Jace summed it up well with that's the way the game's played. And ladies and gentlemen, if you've got a great white in the pool, move house.
Who's the guy out of Jaws who gets the shark? What's it? Can you remember his name?
Oh, I can't actually. He was the cop, wasn't he? He was the policeman out of the first version. Yeah.
Anyway, I butchered our finish, mate. You had a good life.
It's all right. It's all right. We could just punch the live button and just it's an abrupt ending.
It's done. All right. Well, let's do it. It's good night from him.
And it's a good night from me.
Good night,
everyone.